Mr. McCaul is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, as you know, supported this, the Competes Act. It was really a response to the Rising Above the Gathering Storm report, which was a bit of an eye-opener. And I support the idea of federal investments in R&D and public-private partnerships with universities. Certainly NASA, close to my district, has been a beneficiary of this. NIH has done a fantastic job. But I want to follow up on Mr. Donohue's comments. You know, the President signed a stimulus bill into law. It's about 5.4% of our GDP. Unemployment's gone up over 10%. Federal debt's above $12 trillion. And there comes a point where we get over-leveraged in the federal government. Any private sector business that over-leveraged wouldn't be able to stay in business. And I think there's a healthy balance between the federal investment of dollars and the public-private partnerships versus what we can do at the federal level to incentivize the private sector. And I think that's a philosophical debate we are having in the Congress right now. And so in terms of job creation, because both sides we want the same thing, both Democrat and Republican. We want the economy to rebound. We want to create more jobs and good jobs in the United States. And so with all of your experience in the private sector and the business world, and for the panel as well, I'd be interested in your take on this balance, if you will, that we have to provide up here in the Congress.
Congressman, if I might just comment a minute about this. There's no question that the federal deficit is a serious matter, growing in a compounded and significant way, a lot of it being driven by programs that are entitlements that just grow themselves, and these are serious matters. That's not a Democrat or a Republican issue. So everybody says we ought to deal with that, but trying to deal with that issue without first dealing with the questions of employment, as you indicated, is counterproductive, because you're just going to keep driving up federal support programs. So our issue here is to say, here's a plan to create jobs. Hopefully, as we go forward, we'll be careful not to be adding unnecessary federal spending. And as the economy grows, we're going to be in a much better shape to attack this deficit. You ask a fundamental question: when can the government, when should the government stop investing in significant ways and hope the private sector will take a larger role? And I think if you look at the suggestions of expanding trade, expanding infrastructure, being very, very careful on our re-regulation of the capital markets, that we could move efficiently in that direction. There is one crippling issue keeping us from creating more private sector jobs. It's uncertainty. Uncertainty about what tax policy is going to be, uncertainty about health care policy, uncertainty about climate policy. And if I walked into John's office when he was back in the private sector and said, let's create 500 new jobs, he'd throw me out, because he'd said, I'm uncertain about this, I'm uncertain about that. Until I get some amount of certainty, I'm going to keep my cash in my jeans, and I'm going to hold off.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the uncertainty here in Washington with a lot of the policies coming out is that uncertainty is keeping a lot of capital on the sidelines and not investing in the private sector. Any of the other two witnesses like to comment?
One of the things, I mean, certainly I agree with what Tom said, although I never wore jeans to the office. The uncertainty is certainly a big part of it. Obviously, there is a role for the government. The government needs to do those things that the private sector cannot do. And a lot of what's in the American Competes Act are things that the private sector cannot do without government help. But one of the things that we face day in and day out in terms of making decisions on where to invest and in what to invest is the needs of our shareholders, and that is giving them a fair return for the money that they have given us to be stewards of. The United States is suffering from what we all recognize, and that is that we have the second highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. That has an effect. We have a tax structure that is disincentivized exports and participation in an international marketplace where 95% of the world lives. That has an effect. We have a start and stop incentive system for research and development where other countries in the world do not have it. That has an effect. All of those things have an effect on where the capital goes. Our shareholders are not nationalistic. They want a return for their investment. Our obligation is to give them that return, and so addressing those fundamental issues is as fundamental to being able to be competitive as what you're talking about in the American Competes Act.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Castellani.
John, you would say you have global shareholders.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Mr. McCaul. With no objection.